There's a level of beating procrastination where you don't fight anymore. You simply stop leaving yourself escape hatches. Have you seen people who start a task like someone's holding them by the back of the neck? They don't negotiate with themselves. No, I don't want. No bargaining, no waiting for the mood. It's not talent, not luck, not strong willpower. In Japanese tradition, there's an idea. You-sure, ujina being time, or time as existence. You don't live inside time, you are time. And here's the twist. This isn't motivation. It's cutting the habit of think, delay. The price is simple. You'll have to kill the inner rescuer that hides you from pain. And almost nobody can handle the moment when rescue turns out to be a cage. Before I show you the ritual, do a small public action. Subscribe, like, and write one sentence in the comments. What exactly you've been postponing the longest? A conversation, a task, a workout, a letter, a decision. A comment isn't support the channel. It's your stake in the ground. I see the enemy. I read them and borrow the wording because procrastination wears a different mask for everyone. And right now, don't promise yourself starting Monday. Promises are the favorite toy of the person who delays. We'll do it differently. 14 days with 0 forbidden, steps so small they look ridiculous, but with consequences that are terrifying. And in the end, you'll understand why the hardest part isn't starting. It's stopping your need to explain yourself. Back to the story. Not a story about success, but about one person time chewed up like wet paper. He thought he was postponing tasks. In truth, he was postponing himself. And on the exact day he was humiliated in front of witnesses, he heard the name Dogen not as a legend, but as a blade that cuts excuses without mercy. But first, a scene that smells like fish, ink, and other people's contempt, because that's where your 14-day break begins. Chapter 1, Awakening. His name was Lee Yeon-jin. He was born in Joseon, the son of a county scribe, and he learned too early how easily paper becomes ash. After the wars, he was taken to the islands with other captives. Some became potters, some blacksmiths, and he turned out to be useful. He could read, write, and hold a brush steady. In a castle town, he served in a temple library, drying scrolls, grinding ink, copying lists of donations. And every day he told himself the same thing. A little later, when it gets quieter. But it never got quieter. He knew it. And still he left himself a loophole, because a loophole feels like warmth. That day at the market, a copper bowl rang out, and a monastery assistant read the order loudly. By evening, a letter for the steward had to be copied. Straight, no blotches, no corrections. For Yeonjin it should have been easy. Trained hand, sharp eye. But when they gave him a clean sheet, a familiar dark wave rose inside. Fear of ruining it, fear of not being liked, fear of being the foreign Korean. He smiled, took the brush, and delayed. First, I'll go get water. Then, I'll let the ink dry. Then, I'll count the seals again. And while he circled the task, time didn't leave. It watched him like a guard at the gate. By noon, the library was stifling. He sat on his knees, the page in front of him white like an accusation, and inside his head the bargaining started. I'll do it after the bell. I'll begin when the visitors stop. First, I'll fix the brush. That was his procrastination. Not laziness, but a self-rescue ritual. While he prepares, he doesn't risk anything. While he thinks, he can't lose. And there was a benefit he was ashamed to say out loud. By postponing, he felt like he was saving face in advance. Only the cost increased every hour, and he pretended not to hear it clicking upward. On the third bell strike, the steward arrived. He didn't shout, and that made it worse. He took the sheet, saw the emptiness, and said softly so everyone would hear, "You have a brush, you have hands, but you don't have time." Then he turned to the senior monk and added, "You can tolerate a foreigner. You can't tolerate someone unreliable." Those words weren't punishment. They were a brand. People didn't look straight at Yeonjin, but he saw them with peripheral vision the way you see a stain on clothing. Small, yet shame burns hotter than fire. He wanted to justify himself, and that desire became his first cage. That evening they made him scrub the stone steps at the temple gate in cold water until his fingers stopped bending. It was corrective work, with a hidden lesson. A stone doesn't argue with water, it just gets wet. Yeonjin scraped the steps and thought how strange his mind was. When he needed to act, he turned action into philosophy. When he needed to stay silent, he invented speeches. He realized his problem wasn't lack of strength, it was an excess of why. And still, even knowing that, he left himself an exit. Tomorrow I'll start for real. Tomorrow, the favorite word of a drowning man. On the 6th step, he noticed an old board, rain faded. On it was a single word written with a rough brush. Yusha. Yeonjin didn't know Japanese deeply, but the characters were familiar from Korean books. Being time, existence time. He couldn't translate it precisely, yet he felt it wasn't about clocks. He ran a finger across the chipped wood, and a thought stirred. If time isn't a river, but a body, then my procrastination isn't later, it's not being. That thought felt colder than the water. That night he didn't sleep. In the temple yard, the wind pushed dry leaves, and every rustle sounded like footsteps. Yeonjin tried to make a plan. I'll get up early, catch up, copy it. But the plan was the same as always. Beautiful, safe, promising. He knew the bargaining would start again in the morning, and for the first time, instead of bargaining, a cutting question appeared. What if I'm not lazy? What if I'm hiding? Hiding from other people's eyes, from my own failure, from the fact that I'm Chojoy, an outsider. And if that's true, how do I stop hiding without going insane? At dawn he went to the library before everyone else. He wanted to make up for it, to prove himself. But in the empty hall among scrolls and shelves, it hit him harder. The fear of mistakes grew precisely because nobody was there, nobody to distract him. He picked up the brush, and his hand trembled. Not from tiredness, from meaning. And he caught himself looking for reasons to delay again. Fix the sleeve, wipe the table, review the sample. He saw his own pattern like you see a snake in grass, and still he couldn't strike first. Then he remembered the steward's words. You don't have time. And he added silently, and I don't have a face either if I keep doing this. It wasn't drama, it was arithmetic. He understood. 3 more failures like this and he'd be thrown out of the temple, and in the town there wasn't much work for a foreigner. He tasted future poverty like iron in his mouth. And that feeling, not fear of punishment but fear of disappearing, made him stand up and go look for the one who wrote, You sure? He didn't know if he'd find a teacher. He knew only this. If he stayed alone with his later, he'd die while still alive. He stepped into the corridor and heard that somewhere deeper in the temple, someone was already sitting in silence, even though the bell hadn't rung yet. The silence was dense like cloth, with no room for excuses. Yeonjin stopped at the door and didn't dare enter right away. If he entered, he'd have to stop being the one who prepares. He inhaled, clenched his hands, and a terrifying thought flashed. What if my later isn't a habit? It's a religion. And behind the door someone spoke a name that tightened his chest. Dogen. Chapter 2. Meeting the Mentor. Inside sat an old monk. Not important, not frightening. His face was like bark, his gaze like water in a well. No shine, yet you could see depth. A worn scroll lay before him, and by the careful marks Yeonjin understood it wasn't an ordinary sutra, but a text reread the way a knife is sharpened. The monk didn't ask. Who are you? He asked. How many times have you already died today by postponing? The question was strange, and because of that, accurate. Yeonjin tried to smile, but the smile wouldn't hold. like paint on wet wood. Yonjin spoke in the usual way, about being busy, about noise, about fear of mistakes, about foreign soil, and he almost heard himself from the outside, like a man selling excuses at a market. The monk stayed silent until Yonjin ran out of breath, then stamped one sentence like a seal. You're searching for time to begin, but for Dogen, time isn't found, it's made into existence. He touched the character's Yu Shu. When you say later, you're saying, I'm not here. You're asking permission not to be. Those words didn't inspire. They stole air. And that's why they had power. Dogen died long ago. Yonjin whispered, trying to hide behind the obvious. The monk nodded. That's why he's dangerous. He doesn't argue with you. He left a mirror. Then he unrolled the scroll and showed a short passage with a simple meaning. Don't divide life into preparation and life. Practice isn't a bridge to life. It is life itself. Yonjin felt anger. Easy for someone in a temple to say. The monk, as if hearing him, replied, You're not in a temple. You're in a trade with pain. You pay with your future for the right not to feel now. That was the first time the anchor term sounded not like philosophy but like instruction. Uji. The monk explained bluntly, without decoration. Time doesn't flow past you like a river past a stone. You are that flow. When you postpone, you don't wait. You cut out a piece of yourself and call it caution. Yonjin wanted to object, but I'm afraid to make a mistake. And he heard the answer that breaks you. Then make mistakes on time. A mistake in now is pain. A mistake in later becomes destiny. The monk stood and led Yeonjin into the yard. There was a barrel of water and brushes. See the steps? Yesterday you washed them. Today you'll wash them differently. Yeonjin didn't understand. Same water, same stone. The monk continued. Your procrastination is a habit of saving yourself from shame. We won't argue with it. We'll cut it off with a ritual. Not with mood, not with a plan, with a ritual. He rang a small bell and said, From this sound you have a fixed action. Every day. 14 days. No discussion. 14? Yonjin repeated, because the number was too specific, almost bold. The monk nodded. Day 3 is the dirtiest. Your mind will bargain more cleverly. Day 7 is the proudest. You'll want a reward. Day 14 is the most dangerous. You'll decide you've won and you'll open a crack. Yonjin listened and realized. This man wasn't describing the future. He was describing Yeonjin's inner mechanism, as if he had already lived inside it. And that was frightening. If someone can see you that precisely, there's nowhere left to hide. The monk gave him a brush and a small wooden tablet. Every day at the same hour you write 2 characters. You sure, exactly. 3 lines. Not beautiful, honest. Then you immediately do one small action from what you've been postponing. 1 paragraph of copying, 1 letter, 1 set, 1 step. Something so small you'd be ashamed to call it work. But 0 is forbidden. Yonjin wanted to ask, That's all? The monk smirked. You're waiting for something complicated so you can have an excuse. Simple leaves you no speech. Protest rose in Yonjin. 3 lines won't change my life. The monk slapped that protest down like a palm strike. It's not the 3 lines that change you. What changes you is that you stop asking your fear for permission. He leaned in, quiet and personal, not ceremonial. You think procrastination is your enemy. In fact, it's your bodyguard. It protects you from the risk of looking weak. Want freedom? Fire the guard. Firing him sounded almost funny. The consequences were deadly serious. That same evening, the monk brought him to the place where the novice's notice board hung. People left vows there, fasting, silence, cleaning. Tomorrow you'll hang yours, the monk said. Yonjin felt shame grab his throat. Publicity was what he had avoided all his life. But that was the design. If procrastination hides you in shadow, a vow drags you into light. He imagined other people's eyes and understood. The real enemy wasn't laziness. It was the need to save face at any cost. Before sleep, Yeonjin unfolded the tablet and tried to write, Yusha. His brush trembled. The ink lay uneven. He wanted to wipe it, fix it, start over, and caught himself in the old trick. I'll do it perfectly later. He stopped, left the crooked line. It was a small betrayal of his old self, and in the silence he heard something new forming in his chest. Not motivation, but inevitability. Only one question remained. Would he survive tomorrow, when the vow became visible to everyone? Chapter 3. The Vow and the Board. In the morning the temple yard was full. Novices carried water, old men sorted rice, someone laughed by the kitchen. The laughter cut Yeonjin because he heard future mockery inside it. The monk placed a brush and paper in front of him and said, Don't explain. Write. And Yeonjin wrote the first line. I am a person who leaves no zero for 14 days. It felt strange. He didn't promise to become better. He promised not to disappear. Then he added a second part, longer and more dangerous. And for 90 days, and I don't bargain with the hour. He tied a short victory to a long identity shift. He pinned the sheet to the board. The paper fluttered in the wind, and his heart fluttered with it. Someone stepped closer, read it, snorted. A young novice said loudly, The Korean decided to become time. Someone chuckled. And this is where procrastination usually wins. A person leaves so they won't look ridiculous. Yeonjin felt the urge to justify himself. It's not like that, you don't understand. But the monk beside him said only, Uji doesn't argue, Uji acts. And Yeonjin swallowed his speech like bitter medicine. The principle of this chapter was simple, a public seal. While a promise lives inside, you can cancel it quietly. When the promise hangs on a board, cancelling becomes an action, not a thought. Yeonjin realized his brain loved cancelling, loved leaving an exit to avoid guilt. Now the exit would cost him his face. Cruel, but honest. For the first time he saw that discipline is sometimes built not on heroism, but on correctly placed shame. The monk gave him a small rope and said, This is your counter. Every day tie a knot after the ritual. Not for magic, for memory. In the evening Yeonjin had to show the rope to the monk. It was like reporting. He hated reports because a report kills the fantasy of, I almost did it. And fantasy is the sweet part of procrastination. It lets you feel like a doer without doing. Now the fantasy had to die. Yeonjin felt it like someone took away a soft blanket. On the first day the ritual looked ridiculous. He wrote Yusha 3 lines, tied a knot, then copied only one paragraph of the steward's letter. Not the whole letter, not a feat, not perfect. Just one paragraph. But that was the blade. He acted before his mind built excuses. He didn't let thinking turn into delaying. The monk said, You didn't fight. You simply stepped forward before fear put on its boots. And here's the hook. If you can take the step earlier, the pattern breaks. The second day was easier, and that became a trap. Yeonjin caught the thought, If it's easier, I'm changing. I can add more, or I can relax. Procrastination can disguise itself as a reward. You earned rest. The monk warned, Day 3 will come smiling. It will offer you to improve the system. In truth, it will offer you to open a crack. Yeonjin wrote on the back of the tablet, Improvement is sometimes sabotage. It disgusted him to admit that even optimization can be an escape. On the evening of day 2, novices laughed by the kitchen again. One said, If he slips, let him take the sheet down himself. That image, removing it with his own hands, burned Yeonjin. He understood that would be the real pain, not punishment, but his own gesture of surrender. The monk, as if reading his mind, said, Don't chase pride. Chase to our no zero. Pride breaks, no zero holds. dry words, but they were survival. On day 3, Yeonjin woke with a heavy head. His body ached after work, and his mind immediately offered a smart exit. Today I'll do it later, but more. A classic trick. Promise the future extra to steal duty from the present. Yeonjin sat, looked at the rope with no new knot, and felt the past pulling him back. He remembered the board, other people's eyes. Taking the sheet down. Instead of heroics, he did the smallest thing. Wrote Yusha crooked and fast, tied the knot, copied one line, just one, but 0 didn't happen. And in that moment he understood the main thing. Procrastination isn't lack of action. It's the cult of perfect action. While you wait for perfection, you can avoid starting. But if you allow yourself something small, you lose your excuses. Yeonjin felt a strange shame. Shame that he did so little, and relief that he did anything at all. That's the breakpoint. The mind hates small, because small can't be romanticized. Small is truth. That night, the monk gave him a second tablet and said, "Tomorrow the hour begins, not a day, not a mood, and our acts. You think your problem is postponing tasks? No. Your problem is postponing time itself. Tomorrow we'll drive a stake into the ground, and you'll tie your life to it." Yeonjin walked away feeling 2 people arguing inside him. One wants freedom, the other wants loopholes. And for the first time he feared not a slip. He feared that if the hour became inevitable, his old self would start dying for real. Chapter 4. The Immovable Hour. The temple bell didn't ring for beauty, it rang for the body. In early morning the sound spread across the yard like an order. The monk chose the hour Yeonjin usually lost to preparation and anxiety, right after the first strike. From that strike you sit and do the ritual, always, even if you went to bed late, even if it's raining, even if someone calls you. That's how the immovable hour was born, not as punishment, but as subtraction of choice. Yeonjin understood. Choice is where procrastination lives and lights its fire. In that hour, Yeonjin didn't have to do a lot. He had to show up. He sat at a low table, placed the tablet, wrote Yusha 3 lines, and immediately did 1 needle of action. 1 paragraph of copying, 1 brush line, 1 page of reading, 1 bow, and an if-then plan. The monk called it injecting the present. The principle was brutal. As long as you show up at the same time, you stop being the person who waits. You become the person who arrives. On the first day of the immovable hour, an obstacle arrived. A novice burst in shouting that the kitchen lacked water and everyone was called to carry buckets. Old Yeonjin would have jumped up, "Can't let them down," and used that to justify a slip. New Yeonjin froze. The monk said, "Say 1 sentence and come back." Blushing, Yeonjin said, "I'll come in an hour." And he didn't die. The world didn't collapse. It was a small shock. He saw that many urgencies are just other people's noise that easily becomes your alibi. On day 2, the hour became more unpleasant. Not because sitting was hard, but because his mind resisted the very idea of fixedness. It whispered, "You're losing freedom." And it was true. Yeonjin was losing the freedom to delay. The monk didn't comfort him. He explained the mechanism. "Your mind loves leaving a door half open so it can run into shame. We're nailing the door shut." It sounded almost cruel, but Yeonjin felt relief. If there's no door, you don't need to decide. And the decision point was exactly where he always lost. On day 3, the dirty day, the monk predicted, everything went wrong. Ink spilled, the brush frayed, his sleeve got stained. Old Yeonjin would have used it as a sign, "Today isn't my day." He even felt that familiar sweetness. Here it is, an excuse. But instead he did the ridiculous thing. Wrote she even more crooked, wiped his sleeve, tied the knot, and copied 1 paragraph at a dirty table. He didn't run from imperfection, he acted inside it. And that insulted his old pride. By day 4, Yonjin noticed a strange change. Anxiety didn't disappear, but it became shorter. It arrived at the start of the hour and left once the brush made its first moves, as if the body convinced the mind, "We're already in it, too late to argue." That was the practical meaning of Uji, not to philosophize about time, but to become time through action. Yonjin wrote, "Thought is a late bird, action is an early one." And he realized his procrastination begins exactly where thought wants to arrive first. By day 5, people started noticing. One novice came on purpose and asked loudly, "You're writing those 2 characters again. Is it a spell?" Yonjin felt the urge to explain the system and look smart, but the monk taught otherwise. Explanation is also a way to delay. Yonjin answered briefly, "It's my hour," and returned to the brush. For the first time, he felt the power of silence. When you don't justify yourself, other people's laughter loses food. But that was only the beginning of the social war. By day 7, the immovable hour became like brushing your teeth. You don't celebrate it, and you don't discuss it. And that's why it began to work. Yonjin discovered a new fear. What if I keep going and become someone else? What if I have to answer for myself? Procrastination had protected him not only from shame, but from responsibility for growth. To grow is to stop having an alibi. That fear was deeper. He realized there was a part of him that loved being almost, because almost is never tested. The monk gave him the next step. 1 form. He said, "The hour is the gate, but inside the gate you will do the same thing every time, not for boredom, so the mind can't escape into novelty." Yonjin resisted. He loved changing methods, reading different scrolls, rearranging tools, anything to avoid facing the same difficulty. The monk smiled. Novelty is procrastination's favorite mask. Tomorrow you'll learn how sly it is. That night, Yonjin looked at the rope with knots. 7 knots, like 7 small witnesses. He should have felt happy, but instead he felt emptiness. So what now? This is where procrastination plays its last trick. It devalues small wins to drag you back into later. Yonjin understood that tomorrow, in 1 form, he'd have to stare directly into boredom and not run. Because for him, boredom wasn't a feeling. It was the doorway to fear. And he didn't know what was worse, to fail or to have no excuses left. Chapter 5, 1 form. On day 8, the monk brought not new books, but a wooden block for brush training. A square and a line were carved into it so the hand would move straight. Your form is 1. 3 lines of you sure, then 5 minutes of copying without stopping, then 1 small bite of the big task. He stressed without stopping, because Yonjin loved to pause for a second to think, and that second became an hour. 1 form wasn't about quantity, it was about continuity, even tiny continuity. It looked ridiculous, but it worked in a scary way. Yonjin sat. 5 minutes isn't forever. But in the first minute his mind started screaming, "Boring, wrong, redo it, fix the brush, look a blot," before he would have stopped and improved. Now the form forbade improvements inside the 5 minutes. He kept going. His fingers sweated. His shoulder went numb. And a small miracle happened. After 3 minutes, the noise in his head got quieter, as if the mind got tired of arguing. Yonjin realized many inner problems don't die from being solved. They die from continuity. By day 9, he noticed the form protected him from his main enemy, choice. Before every morning he decided, what's the best way to do this? And by deciding, he delayed. Now he didn't decide, he executed. It was almost humiliating to his pride, because pride loves to believe it's special. The form made him ordinary. The monk said, "An ordinary person who never skips is more dangerous than a talented person who disappears." Yonjin felt envy toward the ordinary. Strange, but useful envy. On day 10, an obstacle arrived. They asked him to help in town, carry scrolls to a binder's shop. The trip took the morning. The hour almost slipped. His mind prepared the speech. Circumstances today. But the form had an answer. 5 minutes works anywhere. Yonjin found a corner by the gate, squatted, pulled out the tablet, wrote "You sure" on his knee, and did 5 minutes of copying right there, on his knees, in the wind. The ink dried badly. The letters bled. He felt stupid. But 0 didn't happen. And when he stood up, he understood. Sometimes stupidity is the price of freedom. On day 11, the urge to reward himself hit. I'm almost done with 14 days. I can relax today. The monk called it the pride of day 7, but it arrived later. Procrastination knows how to wait. Yonjin looked at the knots and did the paradoxical thing. He marred the task. 3 lines, 5 minutes, 1 bite, and stop. He didn't prove anything. He protected the form. That was wiser than heroics, because heroics often demand applause, and the form does not. On day 12, people around him began to get used to it, and that created a new danger. When others stop pushing, you start pushing yourself. Yonjin suddenly wanted to speed up, catch up, do everything. It looks like progress, but it can be procrastination in disguise. If you take too much, you'll crash, and then you get legal permission to say, "See, it didn't work." The monk saw it in one glance and said, "The form is not a race. The form is a cage for the beast. Don't open the cage for entertainment." On day 13, Yonjin felt the taste of real time for the first time. He wrote, and he didn't need to ask who he was. He simply was the one who writes. Uji became physical. Time is a moving hand, breath that doesn't break, a small knot that appears. He understood procrastination had always demanded. First, feel ready. The form taught the opposite. First do, and readiness arrives as a side effect. It sounds cliché until you try it in the moment of fear. On day 14, he woke up light, and that was the most dangerous. Lightness whispered, "You won." But the monk warned, "Day 14 opens a crack." The crack looks like, "You can skip once." Yonjin went to the hall, sat down, and instead of the usual calm, heard noise outside. A messenger had come, demanding the library be opened urgently. His mind howled. A valid reason. Yonjin froze between old and new. He understood. What's being decided isn't the day. It's his right to have cracks. He did what had once seemed impossible. He told the messenger, "In a few breaths." Not in an hour, in a few breaths. He wrote "You sure" in 1 line, almost without beauty, tied the knot, and did exactly 1 minute of copying. The minimal protocol, no 0. Then he stood and went to the messenger. It was funny in scale, but terrifying in meaning. For the first time, he put his presence above someone else's urgency. And the world didn't collapse. He felt something old retreat, not vanish, but step back. That evening, the monk looked at the rope and said, "You broke think, delay for 14 days. Now begins what's harder, not breaking it again, but not gluing it back together." Yonjin felt cold. He already saw how easy it was to return everything with one "I'll skip." The monk added, "Tomorrow you'll get sick or tired, not because fate, because your mind will want its bodyguard back. And then you must have the 0 forbidden protocol, or you'll become almost again." Yonjin left and understood for the first time. The scariest test isn't an Uda from outside. It's a soft excuse from inside that arrives tomorrow. Chapter 6, Practice Without Breaks. On day 15, Yeonjin really got twisted up. From damp, fatigue, or because the body finally allowed weakness once the mind became stricter. His forehead burned, his knees were soft, his breath short. And immediately the rescuer's voice came. "Rest today. You earned it." It sounded caring, almost gentle, but Yeonjin already knew. Sometimes gentleness is a rope. He crawled to the table, sat, and realized the full form was beyond him. And the main law surfaced: 0 is forbidden, which means you need a minimum. The monk had given him a minimal protocol in advance. If sick, 1 line of you sure, 1 bow breath, 1 bite in 60 seconds. It sounded ridiculous, but that was the genius. Procrastination loves big plans because big plans are easy to cancel. Minimum is embarrassing to cancel because it costs almost nothing. With a shaking hand, Yeonjin wrote 1 line, tied the knot, and did 1 minute of copying without lifting his head. He wasn't working. He didn't disappear. And that was stronger than heroic effort. On day 16, he was sent to town with a load of paper. The road took almost the entire day. Rain soaked his shoes, and he missed the hour. Old Yeonjin would have said, "If I'm late, the day is ruined." New Yeonjin said, "The hour is an anchor, not a reason for self-destruction." He did the protocol as soon as he could. By a barn wall under a canopy, 1 line, 1 minute. This was the key detail. Discipline doesn't break when you slip. It breaks when you decide the slip cancels everything. Yeonjin saw for the first time that all or nothing is the language of procrastination. On day 17, the mockery got harsher. A craftsman said, "Look, the Korean ties knots like he's catching luck." People laughed. The pain wasn't the laughter. It was Yeonjin's urge to prove himself. Proving is a subtle kind of postponing. You start living for reaction instead of action. He clenched the knot until his nails bit skin and did the form in silence. 5 minutes. 1 bite. No 0. He understood. Continuity isn't romance. It's stubbornness that doesn't expect pretty words. On day 18, the illness eased, and with relief came another danger: the desire to go back to normal. Procrastination loves returning to normal because it removes responsibility. Yeonjin noticed, as soon as things feel easier, the mind says, "You can skip." That's why the monk taught, don't trust lightness. Trust schedule. Yeonjin felt again that the immovable hour wasn't a prison. It was a life buoy. It doesn't free you from effort. It frees you from negotiation. On day 19, he almost skipped for the first time. He heard a call for help, ran, came back late and exhausted, and thought, "Tomorrow I'll do double form." The old song. Yeonjin caught it on the first note and cut it off. Double form is a bribe to the future. He did the minimum, and when he tied the knot, he felt not joy, but quiet respect for himself. Respect that doesn't need witnesses. Respect built on not betraying a small vow. By day 21, 3 weeks, continuity showed up in small things. He stopped losing brushes, stopped forgetting orders, stopped dragging time before starting. He didn't become perfect. He became predictable, and predictability is what craft respects and laziness fears. The steward gave him work without threats for the first time. But with trust came a new risk. The stakes were higher now, and fear of mistakes could return stronger. Yeonjin understood. Continuity raises the stakes. Procrastination doesn't die. It just looks for a new mask. The monk said, "Now you need pre-decided answers, because when chaos hits, you won't think. You'll return to the old pattern." Yeonjin wanted to argue. "I'm holding on." The monk shook his head. "You're holding on while it's calm. The real you will show up when you're humiliated or deprived of sleep." It sounded like prophecy. Fear rose again, but now fear became a signal. Prepare the protocol. That night he sat and listed obstacles: rain, sickness, urgent calls, mockery, fatigue, being late, an ink blot, a fight. Before he was afraid even to write them, as if naming would summon trouble. Now he understood. To name is to disarm. He wrote, "If X, I do Y. If rain, 1 line under a canopy. If late, minimum immediately. If a blot, keep going 5 minutes without fixing." He felt strange, like he was building traps for himself. But that was exactly the point. Traps for procrastination. Before sleep, he looked at the vow board, the knots, and understood. He wasn't just doing a ritual anymore. He was building a system around himself where the old later had no place to live. And that frightened him. Because if later disappears, he must live without the familiar rescuer. Yonjin lay down and heard a rustle behind the wall, like someone sharpening a knife. He thought, "That's not steel being sharpened. That's my new life." And he didn't know who would take the first cut, his laziness or his relationships with people who were used to the old Yeonjin. Chapter 7. Pre-decided answers. At dawn, the monk put a sheet in front of Yeonjin and said, "Today you're not training the brush, you're training your reaction." Yeonjin was surprised. Reactions had always seemed uncontrollable. But the monk explained, "In chaos, you don't decide. You perform what you already allowed yourself to do. So we write permissions now." This was the shift from discipline as effort to discipline as engineering. And Yeonjin felt procrastination losing its main weapon: surprise. He wrote 5 main triggers that always made him delay: fear of criticism, fear of mistakes, surrounding noise, fatigue, other people's urgency. Next to them, answers. If they criticize me, I do the minimum and stay silent. If there's a mistake, I continue the form 1 more minute without fixing. If there's noise, I do the protocol in any corner. If I'm tired, 1 line and 1 bite. If someone calls me, in a few breaths. He stared at the list and understood. It stripped him of dramatic excuses. And dramatic excuses had been his favorite way to look special, even in failure. The monk made him speak the answers aloud like a vow. It was unpleasant. It sounded stupid. But stupidity is the test. If a ritual looks too pretty, it probably won't survive real life. Yeonjin said, "If I'm late, minimum. If I'm ashamed, minimum. If I'm scared, minimum." And suddenly he realized all of it reduced to 1 line. "I don't cancel myself." Uji stopped being text. It became a contract. I exist even on a dirty day. On day 28, 4 weeks, the protocol saved him in a real storm for the first time. The steward brought a new order and said in front of people, "Today we'll see if you're reliable." It tested pride and fear at once. Inside, Yeonjin flared the urge to prove himself, do it perfectly, rewrite it 3 times. But proving is a short road to collapse. You burn out, then disappear. He looked at the if-then list and chose not heroics, but the form. 5 minutes of continuity. 1 bite, step by step. Like walking on stones laid across a river. The obstacle came from where he didn't expect. The senior temple scribe said, "You've gotten too confident. Your steadiness is arrogance." That hit deeper than boys' laughter because it came from a man of the craft. Yeonjin wanted to argue, justify himself, prove he was trying. But the list said, "If criticized, stay silent and do the minimum." He sat and did the form without a word. And for the first time he felt a strength that doesn't need approval. But that strength was fragile. One desire to be understood could break it. The monk added 1 more point. "If I want to explain, I do 1 bite first and only then I speak." This was especially painful for Yeonjin because explanation always gave him a sense of control. When you explain, you think you manage how people see you. But procrastination feeds on that. While you manage the image, you never face the work. Yeonjin understood. Sometimes it's better to be misunderstood than to remain undone. Harsh, but true for him. Otherwise he would become almost again. By day 35, 5 weeks, people got used to his weirdness, and the pressure changed shape. Now they didn't just laugh. They started using him. "You're disciplined. Do it for me." A new trap. You can drown in other people's requests and call it helping. Yeonjin added to the protocol. "If they ask during my hour, I answer after the hour. He feared looking selfish, but he understood. If he gives away his hour, he gives away everything. Procrastination loves other people's tasks, because in other people's tasks your shame isn't at stake. The monk said, "You're building a wall. Soon people will start knocking on it." Yonjin asked, "Why would they knock?" The monk answered, "Because your wall reminds them of their leaky walls." Unexpected. Discipline irritates not because you're better, but because you reveal possibility. Yonjin felt an invisible war thickening around him, a war without swords, but with smiles and whispers. And he understood. The next stage wouldn't be internal. The next stage would be social. He began to notice looks. Some waited for him to slip so they could breathe easier. Some wanted him to return to normal, because normal calms them. That was scarier than open hate. Hate is honest. Quiet expectation of your failure is sticky. Yonjin felt a new weakness rising, the need to be liked. And he realized that need was what made him delay, because once you begin, you risk disappointing. That night the monk said, "Tomorrow the social war begins. You'll be tested not by work, but by how you hold your mouth." Yonjin smirked. "I'm Korean. I already keep my mouth shut." The monk replied, "No, you keep it shut because you're afraid. Tomorrow you'll keep it shut because you choose." A different kind of silence. Not slave silence, but adult silence. Yonjin left, and for the first time his fear wasn't that he couldn't do the work. He feared he would break into explanations, excuses, and the attempt to be convenient, and by doing that, he would restore the old chain, think, delay. Chapter 8, Social War. In a castle town, rumors move faster than messengers. By day, 40 people spoke of Yeonjin as that strange Korean who lives by the bell. One morning a craftsman approached, smiling. "What are you, a saint? Or do you just have nothing to do?" The smile was a thin needle. Answer sharply and you're rude. Start explaining and you're justifying yourself. And justification is procrastination's favorite doorway. Yonjin felt the old rescuer rise. Say it nicely so they accept you. That was the battle. Yonjin did what the monk trained. He did not explain. He said, "I need it this way," and walked to the table. People laughed because they wanted a story, not a boundary. He heard laughter behind his back and felt his body wanting to turn and defend itself. But he sat, wrote "You sure," 5 minutes, 1 bite. And the paradox happened. While he acted, the laughter grew distant, as if a door closed. He understood. Explanation keeps you living in their world. Action returns you to yours. On day 42, pressure came from inside the temple. The senior scribe said, "Your rituals distract. You must be like everyone." Dangerous, because like everyone sounds reasonable. Yonjin understood. Society often disguises fear as reason. He wanted to say, "It helps me work better." But he remembered, "If I want to explain, bite first." He silently did 5 minutes of copying in the scribe's sight. Then he said calmly, "I will do the work, and I will do the hour." No drama, no argument, not defiance, adulthood. On day 45, they tried a trap. They invited him to an important talk exactly during his hour, supposedly about his future in the temple. Anyone with Yeonjin's past would rush there. This is a chance. And procrastination rides on such chances. You throw away the present for a future that isn't guaranteed. Yeonjin felt his chest trembling. He said, "I'll come after the hour," and went to write, "You sure." His heart pounded like he was committing a crime. But when he arrived, the talk was empty. A few moral lectures and a test. He understood. They didn't care about the decision. They cared about his ustupka, his surrender. On day 48, he had his first real quarrel. A novice said, "Your knots are pride. You want to be better than us." Unfair, and therefore painful. Yeonjin felt his tongue preparing a strike, but he remembered. If criticized, stay silent and do the minimum. He left, did the form, tied the knot, and only then returned and said, "I'm not better. I just don't want to disappear." It was truth without attack. The novice didn't apologize, but something shifted in his eyes. Yeonjin understood. Sometimes silence doesn't humiliate, it disarms. On day 50, the pressure turned soft. They began praising him. Good job, disciplined. Praise is also a trap because it makes you work for an image. Yeonjin caught the thought, I have to keep the brand. And keeping the brand is a new fear that pushes you back into delaying. If you're not sure you'll do it perfectly, you'd rather not begin than damage the brand. He wrote into the protocol, "If they praise me, I reduce the task to the form." Not because he's lazy, but because he protects continuity from pride. On day 55, a woman who brought rice to the temple told him quietly, "You look different, quieter." Unexpected. Yeonjin realized the change wasn't in words, it was in tempo. Procrastination makes tempo jagged, rush, then vanish. The form makes tempo steady. Steady tempo calms people even when they resist it. Yeonjin felt gratitude and fear. If he's different now, there's less road back. And when there's less road back, the old rescuer panics. The monk told him, "A big test is coming. Not because I decided it, because life always tests what you build." Yeonjin asked, "What kind of test?" The monk answered evasively, "The one where your old self would choose later to save face." That was scarier than any description. Yeonjin imagined fire, a sudden order, public disgrace. He understood. His system must survive not only boredom, but Uda, impact. And for the first time he felt the whole path had been preparation for one moment. That night he heard commotion in the temple, talk of a letter from the castle, an inspection, lists. The words steward and deadline slipped through like a cold blade. Yeonjin sat in the dark, looked at his rope, and understood. It's approaching. A big test doesn't ask if you're ready. It arrives when you're tired. Yeonjin whispered, "Uji, be in me." And at that moment there was a knock, and a voice called his name as if it was already a verdict. The door opened and a messenger said, "You're summoned, now." Not in the morning, not when it's convenient. Now. Yeonjin felt the old rescuer pulling him. Say you're sick, ask for time, hide in shadow. But his body already knew another road. The hour, the form, the minimum, no zero. He stood and followed the messenger, knowing everything he built, knots, lines, 5 minutes, would either turn out to be a toy or become his spine. And he still didn't know that in the castle a task awaited him that breaks even the reliable. Chapter 9, The Big Test. The castle office smelled of wax, wet cloaks, and power. The steward sat calmly, but there were many eyes in the room. He said, "We need a command copied for a distant post. Tonight, one mistake and the courier leaves with the wrong text. And if the order is wrong, heads will roll." He looked at Yeonjin like a tool. Either it works or it breaks. Before, Yeonjin would hear this as a threat and retreat into preparation, endless checking, delays, fear of a blot. Now he had only one question. Where is my hour inside this night? They gave him a table, a lamp, ink. The night was long, and procrastination sounds reasonable on long nights. Read everything 10 times, then start. He felt his mind offering the old pattern, now wearing a noble mask called responsibility. And then the pre-decided answers kicked in. Yeonjin pulled out the small tablet, wrote one line of "You sure," right in the castle, in front of the guards. One guard smirked. Yeonjin didn't respond. He did 5 minutes of non-stop copying. 5 minutes. And the text began to flow. He didn't wait for confidence. He built it through movement. An hour later, the lamp flickered, ink thickened, his hand tired. The most dangerous thing wasn't fatigue, it was the thought, I've done a lot, I can stop and recheck everything until dawn. Rechecking can be wisdom, or it can be escape. Procrastination loves checking without action. Yonjin turned on the rule. If I want to improve, I continue the form 1 more minute. He continued. Then again. He made small injections of the present, so the mind couldn't seize power. He understood. Discipline in a big night looks like a series of small refusals of comfort. At midnight, the steward returned and silently watched his pages. Worse than shouting. Yonjin felt the desire to please rise again. Look how neat. And right behind it, fear. What if it's bad? He caught his hand, wanting to slow down, to avoid mistakes. That was the point where old Yonjin began delaying under the label of caution. New Yonjin did the opposite. He kept the form's tempo. Steady. Not fast, not slow. Continuous. As if telling time, I'm here, I'm not leaving. Near dawn, an ink blot happened. Small, but on an official document it looked like blood. Old Yonjin would have died inside. It's ruined. He would have started over and burned out. The protocol said, if there's an error, continue the form 1 more minute without fixing. He continued. Then he stopped, calmly recopied that fragment on a new sheet and attached both, marking the clean one. He didn't try to hide the mistake. He managed it. And in that moment he understood. Procrastination always promised him, avoid shame. But in reality, it multiplied shame. Honest action reduces shame. At sunrise, the order was ready. The steward took the pages, scanned them, nodded, without praise. The courier left. Only then did Yeonjin feel his legs shaking. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who didn't disappear. And that's why he completed work other people depended on. He realized something frightening. While you postpone, you think you're hurting only yourself. But in truth, you teach the world it can't rely on you. And that destroys respect faster than any failure. Back at the temple, he expected relief. Instead came emptiness. The big test was over, and now the mind could ask again, why all this? Procrastination loves that question after victory. It devalues the path and offers rest forever. Yonjin sat in his hour, wrote, "You sure," and suddenly understood. Now Uji isn't only about action, it's about responsibility. If you exist in your time, you're responsible for your form in front of others. Heavy, but it made him adult. The monk met him without celebration. He looked at the knots and said, "Today the one who lived later for safety died." Yonjin wanted to ask, "And now what?" The monk answered, "Now the danger is different. You can turn the system into a cult and start despising the weak. Or you can turn it into a legacy and teach yourself softness without zero." A surprising turn. Discipline can make a person cruel. Yonjin understood. The next level isn't strength, it's character. The monk gave him the final rule. Don't say "I do," say "I am." It sounded like philosophy, but it was practical. When you say "I do," you leave yourself permission to stop doing. When you say "I am," you stop negotiating. Yonjin remembered his past. Captive, outsider, almost a person. He understood his old identity was a hole he filled with excuses. Now he could close it with the form. But identity is dangerous. It demands proof. He walked to the board and saw his vow. The paper had faded, the corners curled, but the words held. He could have taken it down and said, "I completed it." And that would be the beginning of the end. Instead, he added a small sheet beside it. "I continue. 0 is forbidden. Uji is my body." He hung it and felt he had made himself permanently visible to himself. And in that moment he understood the real battle was only beginning, because now he would have to live this not for a test but for life. And life doesn't end when a chapter ends. Chapter 10, Legacy. 90 days passed since that vow, and Yonjin noticed what outsiders can't see. He stopped waiting for the right moment. He didn't become heartless. He became predictable to himself. The bell rang. He showed up. A mistake happened. He continued. Mockery flew. He stayed silent. That's an identity shift. Not bright, but quiet. He understood procrastination wasn't just a habit. It was an attempt to keep the old self untested. Now the self was tested daily by a small action, and because of that, it became real. He began noticing other people who vanish into preparation. A young novice kept saying he'd become strong, but never trained. A kitchen helper dreamed of learning to read, but couldn't find time. Yonjin didn't lecture them. He simply left the tablet and the rope nearby. One day the boy asked, "Why knots?" Yonjin answered, "So you can see yourself. Procrastination loves invisibility." And the boy tied his first knot. That was a small legacy. Not words, but an object that forces action. The monk explained Uji's final meaning so simply, Yonjin laughed. You shouldn't search for time. You should be time in one point. One point is your immovable hour. One form is your path without choice. No zero is your ban on disappearing. Pre-decided answers protect you from chaos. Social war trains your silence. The big test is your exam. And all of it becomes one thing. You stop being the person who promises. You become the person who arrives. Yonjin understood the biggest victory wasn't becoming productive. It was that he stopped saving himself from shame at the cost of his future. He learned to carry a small discomfort now, so he wouldn't pay with destiny later. That's the philosophical practical meaning. Pain doesn't disappear. It changes shape. Procrastination gives you the soft pain of excuses and the hard pain of consequences. Action gives you the hard pain of starting and the soft pain of respect. The choice isn't between pain and comfort. The choice is between two pains. And here's the main turn for the viewer. You don't need to live in a temple and listen to a bell to build your Uji. Your bell can be a fixed phone alarm, a candle, a cup, any signal. Your tablet can be a sheet where you write 2 anchor words. Your rope can be a list of knots, check marks, stones. The point isn't Japan or a monastery. The point is removing choice. If you leave yourself a crack, procrastination will live there like smoke. Close the crack, and smoke has nowhere to stay. But there's something most people can't endure. When the system starts working, 2 enemies test you at the same time. First, pride. I'm special. I can break the rule. Second, society. Be like everyone. That's why the last chapter isn't about ritual. It's about character. Character is doing the form when nobody sees, when people praise you, and when they don't understand you. It's not romance. It's quiet. And quiet makes you dangerous to your excuses. Once Yonjin told the monk, "Sometimes I still want to disappear." The monk said, "That's normal. The urge to disappear is the shadow of the old self. Don't fight the shadow. Just light the lamp every day." The lamp is the immovable hour. 1 bite. No zero. Yonjin understood the path doesn't end. It becomes a way of life. And that's the most unpleasant truth for a procrastinator. You can't finish discipline and go back, because back is exactly where disappearing lived. Now when he heard the word later, he heard something else inside it. I'm not here. And that was enough to return to the table. He didn't become a saint. He became a person who doesn't bargain. Sometimes he fell into fatigue, sometimes he did the minimum. But minimum isn't failure. Minimum is a bridge over chaos. Every time he tied a knot, it was as if he told the world, I exist, today too. Uji became his body, and the body no longer asked fear for permission. If you made it this far, it means one thing already lives inside you, the desire to stop being almost. Here's your practical key. 14 days. To break, think, delay. 90 days. To stop negotiating with yourself and become a person of form. Don't promise forever. Promise today with 0 forbidden. And give yourself enemies immediately. A shut door of choice, an if-then list, and a small public sign that's embarrassing to abandon. Because procrastination doesn't live in weakness, it lives in convenience. And now the final open loop. You think your main enemy is laziness. But in the next video, I'll show how discipline can become another trap, a trap of control that makes you hate yourself for the smallest slip, and how Dogen taught the opposite, hardness toward the form, softness toward the person. If you don't understand that difference, you'll build a cage instead of a path, and you'll become your own guard. Your challenge for today? Choose on one immovable hour, at least 10 minutes inside it, and write yourself 2 anchor words, the way Yeonjin wrote "you sure." Then take a bite of the thing you've been postponing. 1 paragraph, 1 page, 1 set, 1 call, 1 line. Not pretty. Honest. And oberzeitelner. No 0. In the comments write, my hour, time, my bite. What? That's your notice board in a digital temple. Second, make a list of 5 if-then rules right now. If tired, minimum. If late, minimum immediately. If scared, 1 minute of action. If criticized, I stay silent and do it. If I want to explain, bite first. It sounds funny. But that's the difference between someone who lives in later and someone who lives in Uji. Write your 5 rules in the comments. I'll pick the harshest ones and break them down in the next story, where the stakes will be even higher.